Hello, fellow explorers. For the fourth time ever, welcome to Story Spelunking. I'm Sierra.
And I'm Stephanie, and I am obsessed with soundtracks.
Hi, Stephanie.
Today we will be digging into the 1981 classic Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. But we will specifically be exploring the role of music in film by talking about one of my all-time favorite composers and one who shares his birthday with Sierra, the great and incomparable John Williams.
All the best people have their birthdays in February. Shout out my February babies. It's our month.
We'll
Just
get to
like
mine
February
eventually.
baby John Williams, who's in his 90s or something.
Yes, he is 93, I believe.
Happy birthday, birthday twin.
Yes. And what an I'm not gonna lie, I am slightly jealous that you share a birthday with John Williams.
And we're the same age, too.
Just a few years younger, just a few. But anyway, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It reminds me of like the 1930s, 1940s, what has kind of been called the golden age of Hollywood, like these classic adventure films. And I think that's probably what the directors were going for.
They were specifically going for an homage to the classic adventure serials of early Hollywood or even on Saturday mornings on TV. I feel like that vibe really comes through if we're going to get into the context of when this film came out a little bit. By the 80s, that was very nostalgia, like the 50s, 60s, 70s serials. And it carried through to the critics because in one of my favorite biographer's books on George Lucas, his name is Brian J. Jones. He has written down some of the critics' thoughts on the movie, some of their things they published in magazines and newspapers. Jones writes, in the pages of Time, Richard Schickel hailed the film as surely the best 2 hours of pure entertainment anyone is going to find, and compared it favorably to the kind of movie Walt Disney might have made had he lived into the 1980s. And that's high praise.
Yeah, and I think that that perfectly encapsulates what Lucas and Spielberg, we should mention, who produced the movie, um, were going for. And just like the film itself plays homage to these adventure movies, they also needed the score to reflect the same sound from the golden era of Hollywood. There are kind of three key attributes of the music of the movies of the 1930s and the 1940s. The first is this big orchestration. You're going to have an orchestra of about 100, sometimes even up to 150 members. And so it's very much classically inspired music, which makes sense because some of the composers of that era, think for example Max Steiner, who composed the music to Gone with the Wind, or Eric Korngold, who composed the scores for The Adventures of Robin Hood and The Seahawk, which both came out in the late 1930s. And then a little bit later, you think of music by Elmer Bernstein, who wrote his most famous score is The Magnificent Seven. But you always kind of think of like this very grand orchestra, and that is the sound that would be from those movies. And then a few weeks ago, when we talked about Anastasia, Sarah brought up the melody of Once Upon a December, and how it, although we don't see the character who sings it, you hear it throughout the movie. And that is an example of a leitmotif. As one music historian, Robert Greenberg, he defined a leitmotif as some sort of musical idea, a motive, a thematic melody, a particular harmony, or a harmonic progression that represents a person, a thing, or even an idea. And so a leitmotif is associated with something on screen, and your brain subconsciously connects that theme with, a character like Indiana Jones or an object like the Ark of the Covenant.
And as you pointed out, I think a leitmotif is something that is not easy, but easy to pick up on, even if you aren't
Mm-hmm.
specifically listening for the scoring of a movie. It's subconscious, but it's also something to be like, oh, I recognize that.
Yeah, it's a great musical tool, and it's a fairly recent phenomenon in musical, at least especially using the term leitmotif. I believe it's originally a literary term,
Ooh.
and I could be wrong. Richard Wagner, the opera music writer in Germany. He's the one who's credited with really popularizing this musical technique of connecting a few notes to a character, like especially his ring cycle and the Ride of the Valkyrie.
Not to tie it back into our personal story too much, but I really didn't know that much about Richard. I would say Wagner based on how it's spelled, but in the German it's like Wagner.
It's Wagner, yeah.
I didn't really know that much about him until when we were on our study abroad trip. We went to Neuschwanstein, which is
Yeah.
the crazy fairy tale castle themed after his works.
Yeah, it's actually Ludwig the I don't remember which number is behind his name.
Third or fourth,
I
maybe.
think yeah, third or fourth. He actually dedicated Neuschwanstein to Richard Wagner. Like you said, like it contains several of the rooms are inspired by parts of the Ring cycle. I think it had like a little like theater in it as well, if I'm not mistaken, where Wagner's plays could be performed.
And that is what rich people and royalty should be doing with their money, is making themed castles to their favorite composers.
I mean, if I had that kind of money, maybe I could persuade John Williams to do a concert for me, but obviously I do not. But the final technique that kind of invokes the sound of these classic movies of the 30s and 40s is what's called Mickey Mousing. And what essence this is when the music mirrors the physical action on screen. So if you think about it, a classic example would be if someone's falling down the stairs, the music is going down the scale, basically. And so those are kind of just three techniques that are characteristic of the golden era of Hollywood film scores.
Mickey Mousing also sort of calls to mind vaudeville, like theatrical comedy productions, where think Charlie Chaplin. The music is really,
Yeah,
it almost reminds me more comedy, even though in this case we're talking about an adventure
yeah.
film. A
And
lot of the Hollywood actors before they went into film were vaudeville actors.
it's definitely Mickey Mousing is more prevalent in comedies, and that's where Williams learned the skill of it was when he was scoring for TV shows in the 60s, in the mid to early 60s. Like he wrote the main theme for Lost in Space, the 1965 TV series, and a couple others, and several of his early scores are definitely for like these slapstick comedy type movies. So the Mickey Mousing technique is used quite frequently,
He had transferable job skills.
as we all desire. But that goes right into the opening of the movie, which I think I can say is pretty iconic.
I completely agree. I love We Are Not Wasting Time. That actually reminds me of something very interesting that I read in George Lucas's biography. Typically, before A New Hope, I believe it is, the credits for the movie were at the beginning. And that was actually a stipulation from the unions, from
Yeah.
the Directors Guild. But George Lucas wanted movies to get straight into the action. He was like, we can see the credits at the end, but if we're going to keep the audience hooked, as you see in Raiders of the Lost Ark, then we need to start the movie and we can do the bulk of the credits at the end. But the Directors Guild saw the Lucasfilm Company logo at the beginning of the movie as a director's credit almost. So part of the reason that Steven Spielberg ends up directing this movie is because George Lucas refuses to put the credits at the beginning of the movie because he wants to get right into the action. So he's not allowed to direct the movie and he hands it off to his good friend Steven Spielberg.
That is fascinating. Like it's so much fun researching into the like behind the scenes of these movies and just how much work goes into creating this art on screen. And you're right, this movie like right off the bat the action starts and I think one of the most or the probably one of the most important jobs that music does in a film that we don't really even think about, but it really drives the plot forward. And if you think about this movie and other scores that Williams has done, if you think about the opening of Star Wars or the opening of Superman, the 1978 version, there's this grand fanfare, these blaring trumpets. But with this, Williams does not. There is no grand fanfare. It's just a slowly rising like, musical accompaniment, and it automatically transports you to this exotic location, which I think you told me is actually
Hawaii. That's another thing I read in this biography. They were on vacation together in Hawaii when George Lucas started pitching his concept, his treatment for Raiders of the Lost Ark to Spielberg, who was looking for a new project after he had a movie that kind of flopped called 1941. And they
which
were, oh,
has a
sorry, go
John
ahead.
Williams score.
Sorry, John Williams. That one didn't slay.
The score is good. The movie is arguably, yes, not
I
very
read
good.
a Spielberg quote where he said that working on Raiders of the Lost Ark was like cleaning out the spit trap, like cleaning spit out of the mouthpiece of like a trumpet. I said, "Oh, Mr. Spielberg, that's gross." But I play the clarinet and I know that is something you got to do. So they were in Hawaii together when they started back and forthing this idea. And Hawaii is where the opening scene of the movie is set. Not in the
I
movie, but it's filmed in Hawaii.
Yeah, I did not know that. So immediately the music literally transports you because I had no idea that it was in Hawaii because it's supposed to be Peru or
They're like
somewhere in South America.
I think it's meant to be like Amazonian because it's some sort of South American, it's giving Inca.
Well, as we will get to at some point, this movie is not really concerned at all with being historically accurate. So we'll just go with what the vibe is telling us. But the music is telling the audience what vibe they should be feeling because you have these. I'm gonna try not to get too nerded out by the score, but I wasn't lying in the beginning when I said I am obsessed with film scores. So the Williams uses these dissonant notes in the woodwinds and this slowly rising melody in the flute that starts to build this sense of uneasiness. Like you are just waiting for something to happen. And the first time Mickey Mousing is used on the screen is these blaring trumpets, right as one of the guides for Indiana Jones tries to shoot him, and he, whips out his famous whip. And as he turns and faces the camera, these blaring trumpets react to what's going on screen.
I'm watching this scene like, well, you should never bring a gun to a whip fight.
Or later in the movie, you should never bring a gun to a sword. I mean, you should never bring a sword to a gunfight. And it doesn't end there, even after you first see the incredibly handsome Harrison Ford for the first time. And even
Truly the epitome. Get out of the way, as the kids were calling it, wet cigarette men. This was movie star. This was for the girls.
1980s Harrison Ford was
Truly
probably,
unbelievable.
yeah,
There's that
pro-
scene, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, when he's teaching in the classroom and it's full of girls. And there's a girl, she's like leaning on her face on her fist, and she like blinks really slow and her eyelids say love you. That's me watching this movie.
that is a great scene. Back into the Amazon. The music also, it just keeps creating this sense of unease. And then I think one of the other really cool instances of Mickey Mousing is when Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, and then Alfred Molina, who plays Sapato. Hopefully I said that right. They actually enter the temple, and Sapito like looks at him because there's this tarantula climbing on Harrison's shoulder, and he knocks it off, and then he has him turn around, and there's just a whole bunch of spiders on him, and Williams uses this high pitched pizzicato performed by the violinist just to capture the feeling of spiders crawling all over you. It's just a really a fun sequence to start a movie with, obviously, but also when you dig into what is the music doing during this sequence, I think in large part, obviously there's a lot of other things going on, but I think the music really helped create arguably one of the most iconic film openings of all time.
I also like that even though they're in a dark old temple, you can still see what's going on. I thought this several times during the movie, and it reminded me of a quote by Lord of the Rings cinematographer Andrew Lesney. They were asking about all the scenes that are filmed, like in Helm's Deep. It's supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
night, they're in this big fortress. They asked him, "Where is the light coming from?" Because it's really well lit. You can still see what's
Yeah,
going on even though it's nighttime. And he responded, "Same place as the music."
that is perfect because that is one issue I have with a lot of more recent movies is there's a couple of times I'm like, I can't see what's going on. Like I turn the brightness up on my laptop all the time. It's like max and I still can't see. And it's not just an issue with my laptop. Was it 2 summers ago? But when the Batman movie came out with Robert Patterson and I saw it in theaters, and there's a couple of sequences like I could not I have no idea what was going on screen because I could not see it.
It's almost like in chasing a gritty realness, people forget that we're watching a movie. I understand that I'm watching a movie
Yes.
and I paid to be seeing the movie, so I would like to be able to see it. Thank you very much.
Yes. And like I know some people are like, well, they're trying to make it, like you said, as most realistic as possible. Like I'm already suspending a certain amount of belief, watching the movie. So it's okay. I'm not also it's really bad if I am while I'm watching your movie, if I'm thinking where is the light coming from. That means whatever's going on screen is either really boring or again, it's it's not good storytelling.
Well,
Like that should not be the focus.
it's just like with the score, most people don't wonder where the score is coming from. So you don't think about the lighting. And to your point about R. Pat's Batman, when I paid to go see this movie in theater 3 separate times, I wanted to see R. Pat's in all his Hot Topic style glory. I need some light. I,
Yeah.
I, I don't mind the music and I want the light. It's more than I don't mind, obviously. I'm not
Yeah.
quite to your knowledge level of scoring, but I did quite enjoy watching this movie specifically for the scoring.
I think there are moments too where obviously you're not really thinking about the score, but it really does help keep the audience engaged and subconsciously connects you with characters. And I find it really interesting that the famous Indiana Jones theme, which is a sequence of 6 notes, which I will not try to hum because unfortunately I cannot carry a tune to save my life. But you actually don't hear his theme until well over 15 minutes into the movie. And it's right in the sequence where he's finally escaping from the jungle into the there's a plane waiting for him. But I think that's just a really interesting use of music, especially for Williams, who's more known for his big fanfare opening scores.
I have to say that's my favorite theme from the whole movie too. We were talking about this a little bit in prep for this episode. The main theme for Indiana Jones, it almost makes you feel emotional because I remember when we would go to Disney World when I was a kid. I grew up really not that far away from Disney World, so it was easy to pop down for the weekend. They would have crazy deals in the off season. My dad, who has always been a really hard worker my entire life to provide for us, he would take us down there and it would just be like dad's year the whole weekend. And my dad is the biggest believer in magic and adventure and wonder that you would ever meet in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So I can just remember like being 8 years old and walking around Disney World holding onto my dad's arm while the Indiana Jones theme song is blaring in the background. And it felt like I was in an adventure. Like this
Mm-hmm.
score carries a feeling with it.
Yeah, yeah. I have of the things that we've talked about so far on this podcast. I probably have the strongest emotional and connection with this film, partially because I was, I don't know, 6 or 7 the first time I saw the movie. And that was also kind of right around the time that I really started to fall in love with history. And like this movie helped want me, like, this is what I wanted to do as a historian. Like, well, I'm not condoning tomb raiding and stealing artifacts, but this whole like I mean, we need to preserve history, right? So, the British Museum. Anytime I hear this score, I cannot help but feel happy because it just brings back so many good memories, similar memories. 'Cause I also went to Disney World many times as a kid because they have great discounts for service members. With my dad being in the Air Force, we went several times. But I think that just also shows the power of music.
I completely agree. And I so agree on the point about this making being a historian seem much more fun, even though I think it is a lot of fun and I never could be doing all this because I am a person who's going to itch and I'm very allergic to mold. So I could not be busting up in these ancient temples. I would be sick as a dog. I would have died just from an allergic reaction.
That's unfortunate. Yeah,
But it does make you want to be into history.
exactly. As the movie progresses, we introduced to the Nazis are stealing they're stealing artifacts, which also is rooted in what I mean, Hitler was obsessed with the occult and like these ancient relics. So that part is definitely, they are playing off something that did happen. So he's informed that the Nazis are trying to steal the Ark of the Covenant. In his conversations with one of his fellow colleagues, his colleague tells him, he's like, well, if you're going to try to go find this Ark of the Covenant, you're going to have to reconnect with her. And you hear the first few notes of Marion's theme. And so you already, the music is telling the audience what you should feel. That clearly there was some past romantic feelings between the two. Without even saying her name, you already know likely where the story is going because of the music.
I actually found a lot of similarities between Han and Leia's theme from Star Wars and Marion's theme, which I think you have a lot more insight on that. But I really enjoyed it. It tells you to feel like this is romantic, even if you're watching the movie and you're thinking this is not romantic at all, which is what I
Yeah,
was
because it
thinking.
Yeah, because it Williams uses the strings mostly, and yes, absolutely sounds very reminiscent of Han and Leia theme, which he would have already written at this point. Yeah, because the first Star Wars comes out in 1977, the second in 1980, right? I think so. I could be wrong on my dates.
I will double check. Not that you need me to, but I will just for posterity's sake.
And then the third came out in 83. I'm pretty sure I'm right.
1980, you're right.
Ah, good. I know my Star Wars.
Yes, she
So
does.
he would have already written the Han and Leia theme at this point.
Another interesting thing about the scoring of this movie is by the time Indy gets to Marion, who is running a dive bar in Nepal, which is inexplicably very cozy looking on the inside.
Well, how'd she even get there is my question.
Is that culturally accept? It doesn't matter. We can't tie history, like real life history, into this, or it drains the fun out of it. And we're here to
Mhm.
have fun. This is like the Anastasia moment where you're like, the point of this movie is not history. The point of
Exactly.
this movie is adventure.
Hmm.
But when they get into a bar fight with the Nazis in this Nepalese dive bar that this woman owns in the 1940s, it doesn't matter. There's no music playing during the fight. So you're hearing all of the fighting noises, you're hearing grunts, you're hearing fire noises,
Yep.
bottles breaking. It's very impactful because there's a good balance of music throughout the movie and then sometimes silence to draw
Yeah.
your attention.
Yeah, that is a great point. And there's other examples as well in movies where it's more effective not to have any music going. And I think probably the biggest example I can think of off the top of my head is in a movie that Steven Spielberg directed and Williams scored, Saving Private Ryan. There is no score played in the opening sequence when they're landing on Omaha. And I think for the exact same reasons, you feel the impact of the bullets as they go through the water or when the boat drops its gate and the German MG 42 machine gun fires directly into it. And so while music can help drive the plot, sometimes you need to take it out to enhance a scene.
It's like drawing a breath. It allows the scene to breathe. Another thing that this scene brings to mind is the conundrum of Marion's character.
Should we get your soapbox out?
We're gonna have to get my soapbox out. I'm up here and I just want to say, I don't think that every movie has to be women-centered. In fact, I think it's okay that there are movies that are more specifically marketed to men and more specifically marketed to women, and women can enjoy the ones marketed at men, and men can enjoy the ones marketed at women. I have no problem with this. My beef is more with the way that women are sometimes written in these movies. I'm sure men have the
Mm-hmm.
same beef with the way that men are written in women's movies. Make no mistake, this takes away none of my enjoyment of this movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the best movies. It's just so fun and adventurous. But sometimes I can't help but wonder if it would be a better movie if Marion was not there. The way that this girl boss is introduced is like, I am tough, hard. I'm taking shots and I'm out drinking this large man, even though I'm a pinky big around gal. Like I can handle my own. But anytime someone touches her arm, she is kidnapped. This girl is kidnapped right, left, and center. I'm like, do anything, Marion. Fight back. And then, so it gets a little further in the movie, which she gets kidnapped. What a shocker.
Shocking.
And I don't want to think about their age gap too much because they have a romantic history and she seems very young in this movie. He shoots the driver of a truck. He thinks she's kidnapped in the backup and the truck explodes. He thinks she is dead. Does he go check? Nope. He just immediately goes to a bar and sits down and drinks some sort of brown liquor and pouts for a minute. And then he meets back up with his friend Sala.
Played
Forgive me if
by
I'm
John Rhys Davis. Yeah.
forgive me if I'm mispronouncing, but yes, one of the best characters in the movie, really good bit of levity, but he's also really get things done. He's effective. And they have this exchange of dialogue. Indiana Jones goes, Marion's dead. And Sala says, yes, I know. I'm sorry. Life goes on, Indy. And they just move on. That's how irrelevant that she is to the movie. They aren't even that sad about it for more than a minute. And they're just like, well, we got to get the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, because is she kind of gets in the way of the plot, to be
She
honest.
is so annoying. And you guys
Mhm.
know I love a girl boss. But I feel like she should have been like, I actually think I'm gonna sit this one out. I would have stayed at Sala's house with his wife and a bunch of kids eating dates.
Do you think part of the way that her character is written does pay homage to the movies of the 1930s and 40s? Because that
Oh,
is
absolutely.
okay. Yeah, I was thinking that while you were talking about it, like that reminds me of some of how sometimes how women were portrayed in, these classic adventures, the damsel in distress.
I don't even have a problem with that trope because I actually quite like a good rescue scene.
Mm,
I think that adds good romantic tension. But the fact of the matter is, she gets kidnapped so frequently. And you know that scene in Pirates of the Caribbean where Elizabeth is on the ship and Captain Barbossa gives her a dress to wear? I think that's an homage to the same sort of thing.
yes.
The dress scene happens not once, but twice in this
Yeah.
movie. And I'm like, why were they carrying these dresses out into the middle of the desert?
Yeah, because I mean, at least with the Pirates of the Caribbean one, it kind of makes sense because he could have very realistically gotten the dress from, raiding a ship or a port. But why does the villain in this movie randomly have a somewhat scandalous dress in his tent in the middle of Egypt?
He's French. That's the only thing I say. Ugh, weirdo. I'm just kidding, French people. I'm so sorry. I am learning your language, but you gotta admit that's why. It's because he's French. Even though it's an homage, I think you could improve on the trope. But I actually, again, it doesn't take away my enjoyment of the movie. It's mostly just silly. And then I remembered how much more annoying the woman character in Temple of Doom was, to the point I was actively rooting for her to be killed. And I said, Mary, it's not that bad.
Definitely in comparison, like I will say I don't like Temple of Doom at all, and I've never actually finished the movie.
It's a little scarier.
I think this one is a much better movie, and only The Last Crusade comes close.
I think The Last Crusade's my favorite too. Pulling back from the other movies in the Indiana Jones franchise, which I think we can agree, even with your controversial dislike of Temple of Doom and our very popular agreement on The Last Crusade, and we don't mention any others in the franchise,
No, those shall remain unnamed.
I found an interesting tidbit about often unsung, but maybe getting her flowers more recently, hero of Lucasfilm, Marsha Lucas. When she watched the first finished, I'm doing finger quotes, but you guys can't see that, cut of Raiders of the Lost Ark, she was the first one to notice and ask, how does Indy and Marion's story wrap up? All of these, probably mostly men, that's me making an assumption, maybe that's sexist. They had done nothing to wrap up their story. Basically, after all the stuff happens with the arc, they get back stateside and you never see Marion again. She was like, audiences aren't going to like that. And I think she was quite right on her advice. They go back and they shoot the final scene on the stairs between Marion and Indy.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, she also is one of the main reasons why Star Wars Episode 4 actually got finished because she went back and like recut the whole film. I'm piecing various stuff together, but maybe we can when we do a Star Wars episode we can get into it.
We definitely will because they wound up giving a lot of money to USC's film school, and one of the buildings was named after her.
So she has gotten some recognition finally. That's
Yes.
good. Yeah. Kind of going back to the movie itself too, while they're looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And Williams again uses a really clever theme to weave, because you don't really see the Ark of the Covenant, obviously, till pretty much, the third act of the movie, but you already know its presence, if you will, because the very first time it's mentioned in dialogue, you hear the first few notes of its theme. Williams used an ancient Hebraic horn.
Shofar.
So he wanted to connect this, as obviously it has a lot to do with Judaism and the history of Israel from the Old Testament. He builds this theme and grounds it in a historical reality, but you don't actually hear the full theme for the Ark of the Covenant until the final sequence. And Williams, in an interview, later said that for the opening of the Ark, I wanted to try and evoke a biblical atmosphere. If you play that part of the score, and then you go and listen to the score from, for example, the Exodus movie and other like biblical epics, or like Ben-Hur, you will hear the similarities between the themes. So not only is Williams invoking an ancient culture, he's also invoking once again this golden era of Hollywood.
I actually love that. And I love that he incorporated instruments that fit more with the theming. He's referencing these biblical movies since this movie draws, I was going to say draws a lot from the Old Testament, but I think that's being a little generous.
A bit.
It's,
Obviously, you don't know where the original Ark of the Covenant ended up.
and that's an interesting thing to think about historically and theologically. When I was watching this, aside from thinking, don't really know the lore of the Ark of the Covenant. Don't know that that
Mm-hmm.
really ties into, like I said, real history and theology. But I had several. These have nothing to do with filmmaking or history. There's the scene where Indiana Jones is holding a weapon, which I mistakenly called a rocket launcher, but you correctly called.
It's an inaccurate depiction of what's a bazooka. He wouldn't. Yeah, I won't
It,
go there because
it's
I
like
will
they
get
weren't worried
lost.
about it, so I can't worry
No,
about it
no.
either. He is pointing this thing at the Nazis who are holding Marion captive and this
Who's been once
French.
again captured.
She can't stay uncaptured. And he's like, just give me the girl or I'm going to blow up the Ark of the Covenant. The French archaeologist calls his bluff because everyone in the entire world can tell that he really doesn't care about Marion that much. He's like, oh, she died? Okay. Shout out Wendy Williams. The French archaeologist is like, blow it up then. And not thinking about the implications that if he shot a bazooka into this crowd with the Ark of the Covenant and Marion, everyone, including Marion, would have died. But
Mm.
I don't know that the solid gold Ark would have been that affected. I don't know how hot a bazooka can burn. I don't know if it's got enough to melt gold. Instead, he chooses to not blow up the Ark of the Covenant and lets them keep Marion and kidnap
A
him too.
true historian.
Would you blow up the Ark of the Covenant for your bay? Comment below. So do that. Would you blow up the Ark of the Covenant, which held God's presence in the Old Testament, or would you save your boot? The implications. The
Yes.
implications. I know what Indiana Jones would have done. And honestly, if Marion had got herself captured for the 50 millionth time, I might have said, y'all can have her. She wants to be there, I think.
I'm pretty sure I would choose to save a priceless artifact. I don't really have a bay, so I don't know if I can actually say what I would do in that situation. But anyway,
Any Bay
they
of mine would not have gotten themselves in that situation if they knew what was good for them.
exactly. And then we get to the very interesting sequence where they, open the Ark of the Covenant, the infamous face melting sequence. And I
This
do think the score is very ethereal.
It is, and I watched this scene, and this scene is it's notorious for being crazy. Watching it again, it still is. I had the thought, I get God's presence is overwhelming and that it would destroy them. Even
Mhm.
in the Bible, Moses can only look at the back of God as he passes by him, and his face still glows.
Yeah, and there
So
was rules about you can't touch the Ark of the Covenant, and there was, I mean, if you read through Leviticus, there was extremely strict protocol of how the Ark of the Covenant was to be moved, and you can't touch it. When King David tried to move it incorrectly, one of the I can't remember his name off the top of my head, he tries to stop the Ark of the Covenant from hitting the floor, hitting the ground, and he is killed is when he touched it. So I think that is an interesting. I don't know if they did it on purpose. Yeah, this sequence does get a little bit out of hand, though.
I am with them on everyone would die. I'm like, yes, that makes sense to me. All I have to ask is why is the Ark of the Covenant filled with ghosts and lasers? Ghosts come out and start attacking them. Why are they there? And then a laser jumps from every Nazi soldier to combine them. Where are the
Yeah,
lasers coming from? Who are the ghosts?
we do know what was held inside the Ark of the Covenant, at least according to the Old Testament. And it wasn't a bunch of sand with potential to become ghosts and lasers. Yeah, I that sequence always kind of was like, okay, they seems like the filmmakers were like, oh, let's just make this the most bizarre spectacle you could think of.
It does remind me of classic 50s and 60s horror movies, though, the way their faces melt off in clear wax fashion. And this also brings me to something that I absolutely love about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that is practical effects. The ghosts and the lasers are not practical effects, but most of the effects in this movie are, and we need to bring that back. We need to
I
get back
agree.
to practical effects. I am sick of CGI. If I wanted to see an animated movie, I would watch one.
And I think it also helps. Like, I grew up watching films of the late 70s, early 80s, and into the 90s, really before, CGI really took off. I think there's just an element of, we kind of mentioned it with the Anastasia movie, this element of like movie magic that CGI is almost too good in some cases. I mean, if you think about it, that's one of the biggest complaints about the prequels in Star Wars is they're too clean.
They are too clean, but I don't see that as a symptom of being too good. I see that as a symptom of computer rendering being very geometrically limited. I could
Yeah,
be
yeah.
incorrect there. I'm not really an animation expert, especially 3D. But I would say good is not necessarily my beef with it. Like, think about them CGIing out Henry Cavill's mustache in the reshoots of Justice League. Like, that was not good.
Yeah, that's true. What I meant was like, not that it was, I don't know if good was the right word, but
Yeah,
like
yeah, I understand.
it's I mean some of the I think CGI has actually regressed in the last 5 to 10 years. Like,
You are correct on that.
because if you think I think an underrated trilogy, and I am using the word trilogy very for a very specific reason, is the Pirates of the Caribbean
Oh, you are right
trilogy.
on the money. Yes.
The CGI in the final film, or even this all of them, but especially the final film with Davy Jones in particular, like that's incredible. But then you see, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. Okay, Ant-Man and the Wasp, the most recent one. I'm not a big Marvel person, so I don't remember the character that's like a is it Mordock or something like that. The
Yes, the
CGI is
yes.
awful, awful, awful. I'm like, how is this? If you had no concept of when movie which movies came out when, you would honestly think Pirates of the Caribbean is a more recent movie.
I actually think there's an interesting point to be made. The prequels come out in the 90s. The CGI feels very sterile. There's not a lot of movement to it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the golden age of CGI, which is around the time Pirates of the Caribbean came out. I still think that is some of the best you can get. And then we've moved into an era where everything is recorded on these screens, filming in volume or something like
It's
that.
called it's called The Volume. It's where The Mandalorian was the first big TV series slash Star Wars was the first to it's like a room that's screens 360 all the way around you.
Marvel does this really bad. You pointed out, and I've like researched some of the researched loosely, listened to stuff about the behind the scenes, and a lot of the problem is they are pushing these films and these TV shows out so fast that the artists who are doing the CGI do not have time to really do good work because they are working constantly on these unrealistic deadlines on these movies that cost $500 million. And so they lose any sense of artistry. They're like a cog in the machine. They don't have time to do good work before they're forced onto the next thing that's going to flop because it was never going to be good because the writing was bad, and then they'll blame the CGI.
Yep. I think we have slightly gotten off track from
Point
Indiana
is,
Jones.
practical effects are
Yes,
good.
which is fine. This is kind of where we like these episodes to be a natural flow. So wherever the conversation leads us, whatever CGI depths it leads us into, we will explore.
And I'm
But
gonna yap. I'm gonna
mm,
yap about everything.
and that is fine because when we were trying, decide about this podcast idea, it kind of was birthed out of the idea that we would FaceTime once a week and we would talk for like 3 or 4 hours about the most random. I mean, if you tried to follow where our conversation was going, you would have been completely lost. So we're like, let's make this into a podcast.
And we're having fun with it.
Mhm. But we're gonna try
We do
to,
need to get back on track a little bit.
yeah, let's get back to arguably one of the best musical compositions, at least in this last century, has become known as the Raiders March, which is the end of the, and Williams combines all the themes that he's been teasing and playing throughout this whole film, and it captures just the pure excitement and thrill of this classic adventure.
I didn't have the technical terms for it, so I just said, love the theme medley during the credits.
Yeah, and I wrote with the various techniques of Mickey Mousing, diegetic music, which diegetic music means the characters on screen are also hearing the music. Think the Cantina Band in Star Wars. Leitmotifs. Williams' score serves as one of film historian Emilio Audissino. He wrote this that Williams' score serves as an object lesson in how to mirror screen action and memorable music.
Your heartbeat almost catches up with the music. So you recognize these things all throughout the movie, even though you don't consciously recognize them. And when it wraps up at the end with the credits, you feel like you've been on this journey.
Exactly. And the same historian, he also wrote that Williams' score fills the film with such a virtuosity and inventiveness that Raiders of the Lost Ark can be said to be one of the finest examples of neoclassical film scoring, as John Williams can be said to be the greatest heir to Max Steiner.
I will say that even if you aren't a film score person, I would say I'm somewhere medium film scoring. I like to listen to scores while I read or do things that require non-lyrical music to pay attention. So I recognize some things, but I think even if you have no knowledge of film composers, that you know John Williams.
Yeah, you may not be able to say his name, but I guarantee you recognize at least some of his scores. I mean, we've already mentioned some. I'm just gonna list off as many as I can think of as fast. So we have Star Wars, we have Superman, we have Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, Harry Potter. He did War Horse. He also did the main theme for NBC Nightly News. He also wrote the theme for Sunday Night Football.
Whoa.
Yeah, the Olympics, NBC still uses Williams' score. I mean, I could go on, and his most recent score was for The Fablemans, which
I
he,
love that
but
one. I've never even
it's
seen the movie, but I love that score.
yeah, I haven't seen the movie either, but it's a very different piano score than the one we were talking about because it's based almost entirely in the piano. But as you can see, like soundtrack is the number one genre on my music app.
And I think you have a very specific term that you may have even titled some research that really ties into this new knowledge I have about the Olympics and Sunday night football and the nightly news. I think there's a term you might give to John Williams' work.
I must admit, I did not come up with this. I came across it was a radio broadcast, the Colorado Public Radio, and they did a series of episodes celebrating John Williams when he turned 90 in 2022.
We're only 78 years apart,
Yeah.
twins.
The producers of the show said that Williams had created the soundtrack of our lives. And at least for me, that 100% represents my journey.
I think that's one very beautiful. In a way, this is a little bit your Anastasia.
Exactly.
And it's really amazing to think that one man could create all this music that we don't even think to attribute to him, and it just plays in the back. He is scoring your day-to-day life. You're coming home from work, you're eating dinner, you're watching the news with your spouse, you're watching the Olympics with your kids, you're watching Sunday night football with your brothers and your dad. And John Williams, he's there the whole time. Is John
Mm-hmm.
Williams in the room with us? The answer is yes.
Yeah, and I forgot he also wrote some of the most heartbreaking music. Schindler's List is
Oh,
also. John Williams. And when in doubt, if it's a Steven Spielberg movie, it's usually scored by John Williams. They have one of the most beautiful friendships and collaborations that I've ever seen in Hollywood. And if you want to learn more about some of the things that we are talking about, because we barely touched the surface, because obviously we're just talking about Williams' score with Indiana Jones in particular. But Disney actually just released an incredible documentary. It's on Disney Plus called The Music by John Williams. Steven Spielberg is featured in it. Obviously, Williams is featured in it, but a bunch of other composers and a lot of other celebrities are included in it. Including, I found one was really interesting. The lead singer of Coldplay is interviewed, and I was like, why is he being interviewed? And it's because in their most recent tour, their walkout song or whatever they walked out to when the concert started was the flying theme from E.T.
That's
Because
so cute.
the cold I don't know his name, but he's a big John Williams fan, and he reached out to Williams in person and asked if he could use the theme.
I
And
believe his name is Chris Martin.
it's also it was just fun to watch like him light up when he was talking about the music, because obviously if we ever did a video element to this podcast, you could see that I have been nonstop smiling this entire recording. But then if you want a more academic look into Williams' scores, I already mentioned him, Emilio Audissino. His book is called The Film Music of John Williams, Reviving Hollywood's Classical Style. And then a more general book that I found was really helpful when you're kind of analyzing music in general. It's Robert Greenberg's How to Listen to Great Music, a guide to its history, culture, and art.
Now, I do not have as many resources on John Williams as Stephanie, because as you can see, this is her passion. She's done a lot of research, a lot of academic research, including award-winning presentations
Thank you.
on John Williams. You know what? It's really exciting to sit with your friend and talk about their favorite things. It just sort of lifts your spirits. And it's also really inspiring me to go read some of these books. What I lack in John Williams resources, I make up for in a love for the work of biographer Brian J. Jones, and today specifically George Lucas, Alive, which I read quite a bit of for to research for this podcast. And shout out to childhood bestie Isabel giving that to me for Christmas or my birthday. Can't quite remember, a couple years ago. I love it. It's really good. Recommended reading to everyone. But if you aren't into reading or audiobooking, that whole book, while I was Googling some extra stuff, I found a page on the California Community College's website about George Lucas that said basically everything that I said from this biography in a much more abbreviated fashion. So you can just go read that and get some tea. And
Yeah,
we'll link all of this in the YouTube
yeah.
video description.
Please, comment, like, subscribe. It really helps. Even if you, especially on our YouTube channel.
We love to interact with those, so definitely do. And as we're going to do going forward, please let us know what stories you've been exploring. What gems have you been digging up? And I want to make a point to say, I want to hear even your silliest stories. I want to hear that book that you loved when you were 12 years old, or that movie you saw when Netflix first started and the only things they had on there were crazy.
Exactly. Because we
Send us
will,
the obscure.
yeah. Yes, please, the obscure or if you have a movie or a book that critics and general audiences hated, but you loved, let us know because we will definitely look into it.
We are out here caving for the hidden gems. I will take your favorite story, and if everyone on earth hated it, I will find the good and I will fight for you. I
Yes.
love to be a contrarian, but also I like to see the good in things. I think we
Yes.
both are really on our journey of seeing the good in things.
Mhm. 'Cause I naturally can be very cynical.
I
So,
can as well. I like to say I'm a reforming hater turning into a lover. So I will use my hater skills and fight for your favorite story.
yes. And so, with that, we shall wrap up. And I'm sure I know I will make Sierra go back to John Williams at some point because we will have to talk about him with other very big franchises.
I would love for us to get into some Spielberg.
Yes, definitely. So, our next episode will be dropping in March.
And we are going to explore the album All This Bad Blood by Bastille. And I'll be getting Stephanie back into the mindset of a Hot Topic mall teen in Deep South Georgia.
I am very excited to go to a very unexplored place in my history.
But a very explored place in mine, and we will see you all for that.